Greetings. My name is Allison Dean, and it is my pleasure to be reading to you a chapter from Anne of Windy Poplars, here in my home in Hesel, as they call it locally, in the East Riding of Yorkshire. Our reading companions today are Henry Plantagenet Bear, comes from a local castle. Bartholomew Bear, he's just out of the baths, wearing a nice cozy robe. Padre Neil Bear, given to me by a British military padre who served in Afghanistan, and Grandpa Bear from Inverary in Scotland. So I invite you to sit back and enjoy as we start to read chapter from Anne of Windy Poplars. Saturday morning, Anne was at the Gibson house bright and early. Anne always looked her best on a sparkling summer morning such as this. She seemed to sparkle with it, and she moved through the golden air like a slender figure on a Grecian urn. The dullest room sparkled too, lived, when she came into it. "Walking as if you owned the earth," commented Mrs. Gibson sarcastically. "So I do," said Anne gaily. "Oh, you're very young," said Mrs. Gibson maddeningly. "I withhold not my heart from any joy," quoted Anne. "That is Bible authority for you, Mrs. Gibson." "Man is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. That's in the Bible too," retorted Mrs. Gibson. The fact that she had so neatly countered Miss Shirley, B.A., put her in comparatively good humor. "I never was one to flatter, Miss Shirley, but that chip hat of yours with the blue flower kind of sets you. Your hair don't look so red under it, seems to me. Don't you admire a fresh young girl like this, Pauline? Wouldn't you like to be a fresh young girl yourself, Pauline?" Pauline was too happy and excited to want to be any one but herself just then, and went to the upstairs room to help her with her dress. "It's so lovely to think of all the pleasant things that must happen today, Miss Shirley. My throat is quite well, and Ma is in such good humor. You mightn't think so, but I know she is because she is talking, even if she is sarcastic. If she was mad or wild, she'd be sulking. I've peeled the potatoes, and the steak is in the icebox, and Ma's blancmange is down cellar. There's canned chicken for supper, and a sponge cake in the pantry. Just on tenterhooks. Ma'll change her mind yet. I couldn't bear it if she did. Oh, Miss Shirley, do you think I'd better wear that gray dress? Really?" "Put it on," said Anne in her best school-teacherish manner. Pauline obeyed, and emerged a transformed Pauline. The gray dress fitted her beautifully. It was collarless and had dainty lace ruffles in the elbow sleeves. When Anne had done her hair, Pauline hardly knew herself. "I hate to cover it up with that horrid old black taffeta, Miss Shirley, but it had to be. The taffeta covered it very securely. The old hat went on, but it would be taken off too when she got to Louisa's. And Pauline had a new pair of shoes. Mrs. Gibson had actually allowed her to get a new pair of shoes, though she thought the heels scandalous high. I'll make quite a sensation going away on the train alone. I hope people won't think it's a death. I wouldn't want Louisa's silver wedding to be connected in any way with the thought of death. Oh, perfume, Miss Shirley. Apple blossom. Isn't that lovely? Just a whiff. So ladylike, I always think. Ma won't let me buy any. Oh, Miss Shirley, you won't forget to feed my dog, will you? I've left his bones in the pantry in the covered dish. I do hope," dropping her voice to a shamed whisper, "that he won't misbehave in the house while you're here." Pauline had to pass her mother's inspection before leaving. Excitement over her outing and guilt in regard to the hidden poplin combined to give her a very unusual flush. Mrs. Gibson gazed at her discontentedly. "Oh me, oh my! Going to London to look at the Queen, are we? You've got too much color. People will think you're painted. Are you sure you ain't?" "Oh, no, Ma, no," in shocked tones. "Mind your manners now, and when you set down, cross your ankles decently. Mind you don't sit in a draught or talk too much." "I won't, Ma," promised Pauline earnestly, with a nervous glance at the clock. "I'm sending Louisa a bottle of my sarsaparilla wine to drink the toasts in. I never cared for Louisa, but her mother was a Tacklebury. Mind you bring the bottle back, and don't let her give you a kitten. Louisa's always giving people kittens." "I won't, Ma." "You're quite sure you didn't leave the soap in the water?" "Quite sure, Ma," with another anguished glance at the clock. "Are you sure this is tied?" "Yes, Ma." "You don't smell respectable. Drenched with scent." "Oh, no, Ma dear, just a little, the tiniest bit." "I said drenched, and I mean drenched. There isn't a rip under your arm, is there?" "Oh, no, Ma." "Let me see." Inexorably. Pauline quaked. Suppose the skirt of the gray dress showed when she lifted her arms. "Well, go then," with a long sigh. "If I ain't here when you come back, remember that I want to be laid out in my lace shawl and my black satin slippers, and see that my hair is crimped." "Do you feel any worse, Ma?" The poplin dress had made Pauline's conscience very sensitive. "If you do, I'll not go." "And waste the money for them shoes? Of course you're going. And mind you don't slide down the banister." But at this the worm turned. "Ma, do you think I would?" "You did at Nancy Parker's wedding." 35 years ago. Do you think I would do it now?" "It's time you were off. What are you jabbering here for? Do you want to miss your train?" Pauline hurried away, and Anne breathed a sigh of relief. She had been afraid that old Mrs. Gibson had, at the last moment, been taken with a fiendish impulse to detain Pauline until the train was gone. "Now for a little peace," said Mrs. Gibson. "This house is in an awful condition of untidiness, Miss Shirley. I hope you realize it ain't always so. Pauline hasn't known which end of her was up these last few days. Will you please set that vase an inch to the left? No, move it back again. That lampshade is crooked. Well, that's a little straighter. But that blind is an inch lower than the other. I wish you'd fix it." Anne unluckily gave the blind too energetic a twist. It escaped her fingers and went whipping up to the top. "Ah, now you see," said Mrs. Gibson. Anne didn't see, but she adjusted the blind meticulously. "And now, wouldn't you like me to make you a nice cup of tea, Mrs. Gibson? I do need something. I'm clean wore out with all this worry and fuss. My stomach seems to be dropping out of me," said Mrs. Gibson pathetically. Can you make a decent cup of tea? I'd as soon as drink mud as the tea some folks make. Marilla Cuthbert taught me to make tea. You'll see. But first I'm going to wheel you out to the porch so that you can enjoy the sunshine. I ain't been out on the porch for years, objected Mrs. Gibson. Oh, it's so lovely today it can't hurt you. I want you to see the crab tree in bloom. You can't see it unless you go out. And the wind is south today, so you'll get the clover scent from Norman Johnson's field. I'll bring you your tea and we'll drink it together, and then I'll get my embroidery and we'll sit here and criticize everybody who passes. I don't hold with criticizing people, said Mrs. Gibson virtuously. It ain't Christian. Would you mind telling me if that is all your own hair? Every bit, laughed Anne. Pity it's red. Though red hair seems to be getting popular now. I sort of like your laugh. That nervous giggle of poor Pauline's always gets on my nerves. Well, if I've got to get out, I suppose I've got to go. I'll likely catch my death of cold, but the responsibility is yours, Miss Shirley. Remember, I'm 80. Every day of it. Though I hear old Davy Ackham has been telling all around Summerside I'm only 79. His mother was a Watt. The Watts were always jealous. Anne moved the wheelchair deftly out and proved that she had a knack of arranging pillows. Soon after she brought out the tea, and Mrs. Gibson deigned approval. Yes, this is drinkable, Miss Shirley. Ah, me, for 1 year I had to live entirely on liquids. I never thought I'd pull through. I often think it might have been better if I hadn't. Is that the crab tree you was raving about? Yes. Isn't it lovely? So white against that deep blue sky. I ain't poetical, was Mrs. Gibson's sole comment. But she became rather mellow after 2 cups of tea, and the forenoon wore away until it was time to think of dinner. I'll go and get it ready, and then I'll bring it out here on the little table. No, you won't, miss. No crazy monkey shines like that for me. People would think it awful queer, us eating out here in public. I ain't denying it's kind of nice out here, though the smell of clover always makes me kind of squalmish. And the forenoon's passed awful quick, to what it mostly does. But I ain't eating my dinner out of doors for anyone. I ain't a gypsy. Mind you wash your hands clean before you cook the dinner. My, Mrs. Story must be expecting more company. She's got all the spare room bedclothes airing on the line. 'Tain't real hospitality, just a desire for sensation. Her mother was a Carey. The dinner Anne produced pleased even Mrs. Gibson. I didn't think anyone who wrote for the papers could cook. But of course Marilla Cuthbert brought you up. Her mother was a Johnson. I suppose Pauline will eat herself sick at that wedding. She don't know when she's had enough. Just like her father. I've seen him gorge on strawberries when he knew he'd be doubled up with pain an hour afterwards. Did I ever show you his picture, Miss Shirley? Well, go to the spare room and bring it down. You'll find it under the bed. Mind you don't go prying into the drawers while you're up there. But take a peep and see if there's any dust curls under the bureau. I don't trust Pauline. Ah, yes, that's him. His mother was a walker. There's no men like that nowadays. This is a degenerate age, Miss Shirley. Homer said the same thing 800 years B.C., smiled Anne. Some of them Old Testament writers was always croaking, said Mrs. Gibson. I dare say you're shocked to hear me say so, Miss Shirley, but my husband was very broad in his views. I hear you're engaged to a medical student. Medical students mostly drink, I believe. Have to stand the dissecting room. Never marry a man who drinks, Miss Shirley. nor one who ain't a good provider. Thistledown and moonshine ain't much to live on, I can tell you. Mind you clean the sink and rinse the dish towels. I can't abide greasy dish towels. I suppose you'll have to feed the dog. He's too fat now, but Pauline just stuffs him. Sometimes I think I'll have to get rid of him." "Oh, I wouldn't do that, Mrs. Gibson. There are always burglaries, you know. And your house is lonely, off here by itself. You really do need protection." "Oh, well, have it your own way. I'd rather do anything than argue with people, especially when I've such a queer throbbing in the back of my neck. I suppose it means I'm going to have a stroke." "You need your nap. When you've had it, you'll feel better. I'll tuck you up and lower your chair. Would you like to go out on the porch for your nap?" "Sleeping in public? That'd be worse than eating. You do have the queerest ideas. You just fix me up right here in the sitting room, and draw the blinds down, and shut the door to keep the flies out. I dare say you'd like a quiet spell yourself. Your tongue's been going pretty steady." Mrs. Gibson had a good long nap, but woke up in a bad humor. She would not let Anne wheel her out to the porch again. "Want me to catch my death in the night air, I suppose," she grumbled, although it was only 5 o'clock. Nothing suited her. The drink Anne brought her was too cold. The next one wasn't cold enough. Of course, anything would do for her. Where was the dog? Misbehaving, no doubt. Her back ached. Her knees ached. Her head ached. Her breastbone ached. Nobody sympathized with her. Nobody knew what she went through. Her chair was too high. Her chair was too low. She wanted a shawl for her shoulders, and an afghan for her knees, and a cushion for her feet. And would Miss Shirley see where that awful draught was coming from? She could do with a cup of tea, but she didn't want to be a trouble to anyone, and she would soon be at rest in her grave. Maybe they might appreciate her when she was gone. Be the day short, or be the day long, at last it weareth to evening song. There were moments when Anne thought it never would, but it did. Sunset came, and Mrs. Gibson began to wonder why Pauline wasn't coming. Twilight came. Still no Pauline. Night and moonshine, and no Pauline. "I knew it," said Mrs. Gibson cryptically. "You know she can't come till Mr. Gregor comes, and he's generally the last dog hung," soothed Anne. "Won't you let me put you to bed, Mrs. Gibson? You're tired. I know it's a bit of a strain having a stranger round instead of someone you're accustomed to." The little puckery lines around Mrs. Gibson's mouth deepened obstinately. "I'm not going to bed till that girl comes home. But if you're so anxious to be gone, go. I can stay alone. Or die alone." At 9:30, Mrs. Gibson decided that Jim Gregor was not coming home till Monday. Nobody could ever depend on Jim Gregor to stay in the same mind 24 hours. And he thinks it's wrong to travel on Sunday even to come home. He's on your school board, ain't he? What do you really think of him and his opinions on education?" Anne went wicked. After all, she had endured a good deal at Mrs. Gibson's hands that day. "I think he's a psychological anachronism," she answered gravely. Mrs. Gibson did not bat an eyelash. "I agree with you," she said. But she pretended to go to sleep after that. Here ends chapter 14 of Anne of Windy Poplars. I hope you enjoyed it.